From the College by the Lake, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Local, regional, national, and international guests discussing the issues and topics affecting the way you live are on Forum, the North Idaho College Public Forum, with your host and moderator, political scientist, Tony Stewart.
Welcome to today's program. It's very difficult to say exactly all the areas we'll cover, but I would advertise this program as one on nuclear fuels processing. We're very fortunate to have a guest from Eastern Idaho who is highly qualified to discuss this and a number of issues dealing with nuclear questions in the field of chemistry. I welcome to the program Philip A. Anderson. Our guest holds an Associate of Arts degree from Scottsbluff College in Nebraska. He also has a bachelor's degree in the field of chemistry from Colorado State College in 1964, and he has done graduate work at Arizona State University, Idaho State University, and the University of Idaho. Our guest has very distinguished credentials over the past 30 years as he has pursued his profession. I would like to say that he has been since 1965 with the Idaho National Engineering Laboratory in Eastern Idaho. He currently, since October the 1st of 1994, is a fellow scientist for the Lockheed Idaho Technologies Company. Our guest is also the former president of the Idaho Academy of Science, holding that position in 1988 and 89. He is presently the executive secretary of the Idaho Academy of Science. Our guest is also a member of the American Nuclear Society. In 1988 through 93, he was chairman of the National Membership Committee. He is also an active member of INL's Speakers Bureau. I should add that our guest has also applied for a number of patents, and he has succeeded in one that was called, in 1993, the United States patent granted for mercury-free dissolution of aluminum-clad nuclear fuel in nitric acid. Again, Mr. Anderson, it's a pleasure having you on our program. We look forward to questioning you on this important issue.
Thank you for the warm welcome.
And I'm very pleased to once again welcome back regular panelist Steve Schink, who is the Dean of College Relations and Development at North Idaho College. And next to him, we're very pleased to have a visiting panel member today from the faculty at North Idaho College, Mr. Dale Marcy from the Division of Natural Sciences. And I shall ask Steve to commence the questioning.
Mr. Anderson, I wonder if you'd take us, and Tony covered your background a little bit, but to take us through some of the things you've been doing for the past 30 years, and particularly explain to me, who doesn't know much about science, what you mean when you say that you're a process chemist.
Okay, well, my technical education is in chemistry. I came to Eastern Idaho in 1965. I went directly to my current job at the Idaho Chemical Processing Plant at the INEL. The facility is a large chemical plant. We have, over the years, in fact since the early 1950s, received and stored the used nuclear fuels from United States government reactors. Most of the fuels from U.S. government reactors are from the U.S. Navy. The U.S. Navy is very much into nuclear power, and they have generated a lot of fuels. We have received those, and the process has been to chemically process the fuels, that is, dissolve them, recover the unused uranium fuel for recycle, and then to take the high-level radioactive waste, solidify it, and to store it for final stabilization and ultimately to be put into a repository for disposal. And as a process chemist, my job has been to work on the chemistry of any of a number of those processes, dissolving the fuel, separating the uranium. There's a lot of chemical support, both development and fine-tuning of the chemical process, just to make sure that the facility works right. And over the years, I'm pleased to say that it has worked very well.
How big a part of what INEL does is the process you just described?
Let's see, to put it in terms of percentage, I suppose the best way to do that would be in terms of number of employees. In the company that has been operating the Idaho Chemical Processing Plant up until the beginning of October, WINCO, Westinghouse Idaho Nuclear Company, we had about 1,800 employees. That's out of a total workforce at the INEL of something over 10,000.
I see. Now, I know that one of the reasons for your trip north, and one of the reasons we have you on the show today, is because of your involvement with the Idaho Academy of Science. I wonder if you could tell us just a little bit more about that organization and what it does.
The Idaho Academy of Science is an organization that I've really come to love in the past decade. It is an organization, an academy of scientists and science educators that has been developed for the purpose of promoting science and science education, particularly right here in Idaho. We currently have 300-some full-time members, another 30-some student members. These are current membership numbers. We are represented at 9 colleges and universities across the state. We have a lot of members at the Idaho National Engineering Laboratory and other industries that employ scientists and engineers. We are the only statewide organization that embraces all scientific disciplines. There's a place for members in virtually everything from, I'm trying to think of from agriculture to zoology, A to Z. We embrace them all and provide an environment in which people can present their papers at a technical meeting once a year, and we have a journal in which they can publicize their work right here in Idaho.
Is it a growing organization? Is that membership level you just mentioned to us an all-time high or fairly stable?
I don't know. I've only been the executive secretary for a few months. I think we've probably been this large before, a few years ago, but I think we're also growing right now. I would hope that we will have approximately 500 permanent members over a long period of time in the next few years.
Dale, please.
From your perspective as a chemist at INEL, do you think the technology that the United States is developing right now is going to be world class because of political constraints? You know, some changes that are occurring right now, such as with argon labs and some of the restrictions on them. Do you think you're going to be able to be world class?
I think we will continue to be world class. Certainly we have been in the past. In nuclear technology especially, nuclear technology all over the world reflects work, much of which was originally developed at the INEL. There are a number of changes occurring that there's different emphasis now. The environmental field is growing by leaps and bounds. There is a lot more emphasis, and with good reason, being put into environmental sciences. We have a good environment here in Idaho that perhaps we have an advantage that many other parts of the country don't. There are a lot of people that would love to come live in Idaho, relatively low population. We still have a relatively pristine environment, good outdoor recreational opportunities. That attracts a lot of people. Recently we had a contract change at the INEL. The new contractor is a subsidiary of the Lockheed Corporation, Lockheed Idaho Technologies Company. I am now an employee for that company, LITCO, and I think we're going to see a number of major changes. There's a lot more emphasis going into developing technologies that can be spun off and put into the private sector, and there's virtually no limit to the areas in which technology can be developed. I think in the future the INEL will probably be somewhat less a nuclear laboratory. I think it will definitely continue to be a world-class center for the development of scientific technology, etc.
One of the statements that you made earlier about what you did, in that you processed the fuel, and then it was through the chain of chemistry it became a solidified material. Where's that solidified material being stored nowadays from?
At the present time, well, first let me review a little bit what it is you're talking about. We were talking about the nuclear fuel that has come to Idaho, much of it from the United States Navy. Much of our work is military related in that the fuel comes from the Navy. It is not weapons related, as many people seem to think when they hear the word military. We do take the military fuels, the naval fuels. We've stored them on site. There are 2 major locations. Much of it now is at the Idaho Chemical Processing Plant where I work. Until a couple of years ago, the way of handling these spent nuclear fuels was to dissolve them in acid, and the chemical process depended upon what was the composition of what particular type of fuel. The uranium was then chemically separated, purified for recycle, and the high-level radioactive waste that remains behind is first in liquid form. It is then solidified by a process called calcining. Calcining is essentially a high-temperature evaporation where the water is removed from the material, and a dry, solid granular product remains behind. It looks a lot like lawn fertilizer. And that is the final product of the high-level radioactive waste that we have at the INEL now. And it is stored in large stainless steel bins that are situated inside concrete vaults.
Is this to be the ultimate repository for it, or will that go to another site for long-term storage?
I think that ultimately it will probably be processed into a more stable chemical form, such as being vitrified into a glass or put into a ceramic or otherwise encapsulated and stabilized in stainless steel or other type of metal canisters. And then that material will probably go into a geologically stable repository such as Yucca Mountain, Nevada, some sort of a geological formation for ultimate disposal. I don't think anybody seriously expects that it would stay here in Idaho for ultimate disposal. Now, since it is radioactive, of course, it's decaying to become less radioactive all the time. The longer you wait, the less radioactive it is. But we would be at least hundreds of years before most of it would be down to the levels that it could be considered low-level radioactive waste. I fully expect it to be processed while it is still high-level waste and end up in some repository. Unfortunately, that's where it becomes largely a political decision rather than a decision just based on sound technology and cost, risk, benefits. And those type of decisions are difficult to affect in this country. Radioactive waste management all across the country is much more a social-political issue than it is a technical issue.
I would like to continue along the line that Del Marcy has been going. Again, for particular people in North Idaho may not be as familiar as Eastern Idaho with all the workings of the research and the storage and so forth. I've gathered from your comments today that you've indicated that we are bringing nuclear fuels in that, like the U.S. Navy's used. I assume that's on, for example, as fuel in their case with submarines and so forth.
Yes.
And you've also indicated, I believe, that we do receive some of the nuclear fuels from the nuclear power plants around the United States.
Not normally. Only in special cases where some of the fuel is either already government owned or if it's for special study or examination, such as the fuel from the 3 Mile Island unit that had the accident. Other than that, it's government-owned fuels that are received at the INEL.
That come to INEL. The nuclear fuel waste from the power plants around the country, are those stored or processed at different places in the United States?
For the most part, I think they are just being stored on location at the sites where they were generated at the present time.
Okay. In addition to those that you've identified, is there other, is Idaho a depository for other research or nuclear waste from anywhere else in the United States and any other type of projects?
I'm not really sure. There could be some small-scale projects, some that I am not aware of or that have occurred in the past, but there are not any other large or significant amounts of radioactive waste or radioactive material coming to the INEL that I'm aware of. Qualify that I'm aware of.
Sure, sure. And as a technician, you don't have the same responsibilities, to be fair to you, that management does in knowing about every aspect of the companies and the process. Something else I'd like to pursue to also continue this clarification. It's very important, I think, to understand that there are different components that you've indicated in the work that you are dealing with, about 1,800 employees out of 10,000. So there are different components. One of them is where you're talking about research is going on. And I would like for you to give us a little more information about research, which is contrasted with where you are processing fuels to send back the usable fuels back to the Navy or wherever, and the others are stored. So it's a very complicated or involved question. One is distinguish between the research and also processing fuels and any other component that might be involved in this whole process.
I'm not quite sure how to answer that question. Now, I can tell you that in the past, production and research are somewhat overlapping.
Okay.
You develop the processes first, then they come online and you continue to improve them. As they operate, you can obtain more information, some of which can be published and then shared with the outside world, and sometimes that new technology that comes from that has economic value. One of the best examples I know of a small process that started up in the 1960s was the waste calcining facility. That was the facility that first solidified real liquid high-level radioactive waste. And it started essentially not much more than a pilot plant scale, a demonstration scale, but it worked so well that it operated for around 15 years or so as a production facility. And now that type of fluidized bed combustion technology has spread worldwide for a variety of other applications outside the nuclear field.
So I really hear something very important here, and that is, as you're doing some of your jobs and responsibilities to separate the fuel that can be used again and that's be stored, just that process itself develops some new techniques, and research is automatically included in that process, isn't it?
They are indeed totally overlapping. Now, of course, we do have projects that are strictly research and development, many of which are nuclear, many are not. In fact, a lot of people do not realize how much non-nuclear work is going on at the INEL now. Biotechnologies, the Cybertran, which is a transportation technology, a high-speed train, which might have application at the INEL or elsewhere, has received some publicity. In fact, I'd really like to stress how much non-nuclear work is going on and how much more will be in the future. I'd like to point out that the N in INEL is not nuclear. It's the Idaho National Engineering Laboratory.
And you could be studying and dealing with other energies. I know I've heard some reports about the interest in laser research and so forth. Is that taken much hold at that particular center?
There is some laser research underway. That's far enough out of my field that I
Sure.
cannot elucidate. I cannot elaborate any further. Sorry.
One final question, and I'll go at the panel. Now, not addressing what we have addressed, but another trend that is in an area that is of a concern to the governor of Idaho. Governor Cecil Andrus has expressed a lot of concern that he believes that Idaho has been selected as a depository for the future, not what you've been doing in the past, but in the future for simply what he calls a nuclear dump site for nuclear waste, not only in the United States but other countries in the world. I know that the United States has just reached agreement with some other countries to encourage them to reduce their nuclear potential or even eliminate it. And those rods, we will buy them, and there's this controversy now that the first shipment is in at South Carolina. And I know you're not in management, and I know you're not in politics, but if that was to be a policy decision that Idaho would be chosen for around the world nuclear waste, what kind of safeguards would there be, or is it wise from a technical viewpoint to choose one site that this small, a state as small as Idaho, to receive it from all over the world, and just for the purpose of storage? We're not talking about research.
There are so many aspects to that question, I'm not sure which to address first. You are correct in pointing out that I am a technical person. I am not a manager. I have nothing to do with the policy decisions. And of course, what I'm sharing with you here today is my own opinion,
Yes.
and not necessarily that of Lockheed or the Department of Energy at the INEL. First, you mentioned Governor Cecil Andrus. You suggested that he believes that the INEL may have already been selected to be...
Or the state of Idaho.
I'm not sure that the governor really believes that. He has expressed that he doesn't want it to be. And I think there is some legitimate basis to the fact that geologically there are probably better places for it. As far as the technical workforce that could handle the technology, I don't think there is a better place. Idaho's scientists and engineers are second to none in being able to handle those technologies. I'm not aware of any significant amounts of commercial fuel, either in this country or from the outside of the U.S., that are bound for the INEL. Some limited amounts for research purposes could be very possible. Different types of nuclear fuels are very different. And I have no knowledge that such a program would be coming our direction. If the U.S. government were looking for a place where it's politically acceptable, Idaho might be an easier place than some. I suppose most of us all think, I know Richard Stallings, the nuclear waste negotiator, who was formerly the congressman of our 2nd district in southeast Idaho, believes that if decisions aren't made, that it will be Nevada by default. He says that it will probably be rammed down their throats. That plus an awfully lot of money and employment to handle it. But if it were to come to Idaho, I suppose one of the advantages that they would see would be one, wide open space, and two, a technical workforce that, because it has the advantage of understanding nuclear technology, is not afraid of it.
Thank you, Steve Sheen.
It was interesting to me that you mentioned that INEL does a great deal of work other than nuclear work. Looking at the facility as a whole, and it's pretty remarkable. 10,000 employees, and many of them scientists and skilled technologists. That can't be a common occurrence. Are there other facilities like INEL in other places in the United States?
Well, there are some similar facilities that are also largely nuclear facilities. Near the Tri-Cities of Washington is the Hanford Reservation. I think they probably have a larger workforce than we do. I'm not familiar enough with the intricacies of what goes on there that I can say that they are as diverse as we are, although I do know there's a lot of diversity. At Savannah River Laboratories in South Carolina, there's a similar installation, largely nuclear, and it was largely involved with the weapons program, making production materials for the nuclear weapons. They are a large facility with a very talented workforce, and probably more predominantly nuclear there than elsewhere. Other national laboratories, Los Alamos, Livermore Labs in California, Brookhaven in New York, Long Island. There are a number of others that probably would almost be comparable, but maybe I'm just a little bit prejudiced and wanting to think of Idaho as the most diverse as far as the broad spectrum of technologies.
It seems to me that it was only a year or so ago, although it was probably significantly longer than that, that INEL was a candidate for the Nuclear Accelerator Project, which I guess would have been a huge additional, what's the right way to say it, assignment, if you will, for INEL. How do those jobs come to you there? Is it always a bid process, or maybe that isn't even the right way to put it? That seemed to be essentially a political process, but there was some element there of saying, yes, we can do this, and this is something we want to do. How do most of the major assignments that INEL tackles, how do they come about?
For something as large as that accelerator program, I personally think, and this is my opinion, that it was the state, the area with the strongest congressional delegation was able to win it, which was why Texas was decided. Our 2 senators and 2 congressmen for the entire state of Idaho tried their best, but it did not come to Idaho. As far as the...
It's probably a tribute to the quality of the people that you have there that Idaho was even in the running, given the reality of the political process involved, but excuse me for interrupting.
That could be. Now, as far as other projects coming here, some of the smaller ones, and particularly when you mention bidding, I think you're probably thinking about who are the companies that come to operate the facilities that are already there. The INEL is a large government-owned facility. Most of the processes, the equipment, the entire reserve, the 890 acres, which is about 90% the size of the state of Rhode Island, are under the jurisdiction of the U.S. Department of Energy. Idaho Operations Office, most of it. Argonne National Laboratory from Chicago also has a portion there. But recently we had this contract change when Lockheed Idaho Technologies in competitive bidding was able to win the contract. And the type of competitive bidding there is in presenting to the Department of Energy how they will operate the facilities and what they would accomplish by certain times and how they would do it, and certain financial limitations and incentives and liabilities and so forth, and the Department of Energy selected the contractor based on what they thought was the best bid.
Actually, I wasn't thinking about that, but I'm glad you pointed it out because I think it's important for people to know. I was certainly confused about how INEL is structured, and there may just be more privatization going on in federal government than many people realize, so I appreciate you pointing that out.
Bill, Marcy.
When you talked about the process technologies, you mentioned some of the safeguards that are in place. Does the technology in Idaho, is it being focused now more on safer ways to handle the nuclear processes? Is that some of the research that goes on there, or better ways to take care of some of the radioactivity problems?
That is a significant aspect, safety. Not only in nuclear fission, but also nuclear fusion. Safety work, Idaho has been the lead laboratory in that technology for a number of years, for the work at least sponsored by the U.S. Department of Energy. Safety at all levels receives absolutely the highest priority. Every employee at every level at the INEL understands that safety comes first. Anyone who knowingly breaks a safety regulation, his or her job is in jeopardy. There is zero tolerance for bending safety regulations. Any person doing any kind of a job must believe that he or she is able to do that safely, or they do not have to do the job. Safety, well, If you were to check the numbers for the cost of the workman's compensation insurance, you would find that the safety at the INEL leads that of the rest of the state. It indeed is a safe place to work.
Has the federal government standards of lowering the acceptable exposure limits, has that impacted research at INEL?
I don't know that it's impacted research, but it probably has impacted the production and operation to a certain degree, in that we do not have as many workers doing as much work in radiation areas where they might receive exposure. The positive end of that is that it has caused people to stop and think and make the engineering changes to be able to do the work remotely or more efficiently with less exposure. So it costs a little more, takes a little longer when you use the ALARA philosophy. ALARA, that's A-L-A-R-A, which means as low as reasonably achievable for radiation exposure. It's more expensive, but there has been less personnel exposure, and as a result, the technology using remote operation, robots even, has received a boost as a result.
Mr. Anderson, we're almost out of time, but we want to take advantage of your expertise and the research that you've done. What are some of the areas that you think we're going to make advancements in the future in the research you're doing? I want you to use this opportunity to be visionary and tell us what you anticipate that may happen in the field of research, in nuclear research.
One of the most popular ones, the politically acceptable one that everyone seems to be in favor, is BNCT, boron neutron capture therapy, which is a cancer therapy in which, without surgery, a certain type of brain tumor can be treated with fairly good success, and that apparently is coming to the INEL now. Environmental research is receiving the lion's share of attention now. There's a lot more funding going into that. The Idaho National Engineering Laboratory is probably the least contaminated of the major nuclear laboratories around the country. Certainly we have a considerable amount of research and development going into that. There's going to be a lot come out of the other laboratories across the country too. As far as nuclear reactor operation power safety research, that is continuing at the test reactor area.
I've just got a signal that we're out of time. I know you have other things you could tell us about, and we hope you can come back sometime and carry on this conversation. Thank you very much for being with us.
It's been my pleasure.
Ladies and gentlemen, our guest has been Philip A. Anderson, who is an employee and a chemist with and called the fellow scientist at Lockheed Idaho Technologies Company, which is part of Idaho National Engineering Laboratory. I'm sure you found this program most interesting, and I would like to invite you to be with us again next week when we'll discuss yet another issue. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum was videotaped live from the studios of Instructional Technology on the campus of North Idaho College for viewing at this more appropriate time. We invite you to join us again next week for another all-new edition of the North Idaho College Public Forum on this public television station.